In the realm of heinous crimes, few cases are as chilling and perplexing as that of Chris Coleman, a family killer whose actions shook a community to its core. Chris was an avid churchgoer and active member of the televangelist scene in America, as well as head of security for one of the most famous Christians in the USA, Joyce Meyer. Chris seemed to be a fairly normal family man, but Chris harbored evil intent behind the scenes. With an unquenchable sexual appetite and a narcissistic, selfish persona, Chris to this day, and with his many supporters, lives in a deep denial of what he did.
Was your wife alive?
Oh, yeah.
That's right. So he's 1 week ago.
What would you say if I told you that I don't think she was?
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think she was. She was.
Okay.
She was laying right beside me.
Right. And I'm not doubting that. I'm not doubting that you were there, and I'm not doubting that you care. But I am doubting that she was alive when you left this morning. Physically, what we have are different ways to tell how long a person's been deceased. That was done. And what do you think that showed?
I don't know. I guess the time frame when I was gone. I mean...
No, you guess wrong. Chris, we need to get this resolved, okay? That you can't argue with physical evidence.
Right. I'm not trying to argue with it.
All right. What I'm telling you is there is no other explanation. There's no other reason.
Chris Coleman appeared to leave a seemingly idyllic life as security chief of prominent televangelist Joyce Meyer. He projected an image of faith, righteousness, and devotion to family. However, behind closed doors, a darker reality emerged. Coleman nurtured a secret affair with Tara Lynn's, his wife's old school friend, and began to harbour deep resentment and contempt towards his wife and young 2 sons. On May 5, 2009, in their suburban Illinois home, he ruthlessly murdered his family, ending their lives in a disturbing act of violence. Chris Coleman's transformation from a seemingly ordinary man into a remorseless killer raises profound questions about the nature of evil. What drives individuals to commit such heinous acts against those closest to them? In Coleman's case, a combination of deeply rooted resentment, a desire for personal freedom, and an inability to reconcile his desires with the constraints of family life. His actions showcase the darker aspects of human nature, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The seeds of the murder started when Chris had been having an affair with the beautiful Tara Lynn's for about 6 months before the murders. Promising his lover Tara that he would leave his wife Sherry Coleman, Chris desperately wanted a fresh start. However, he was torn. Joyce Meyer, his boss, would not have an adulterer nor a divorcee on her payroll, and Chris was earning over $100K as head of her security. The paradox was simple: divorce Sherry and leave his kids, but lose his amazing, prestigious job. Instead, Chris elongated the affair with frequent rendezvous and crude messages, promises of divorce to Tara and abuse of Sherry, but he never had the guts to divorce his wife. Instead, he opted for making the worst choice possible: annihilation of his own family. Despite his escalating internal conflicts, he projected an image of devotion and piety, deceiving those around him, including his wife and colleagues. Chris Coleman's denial, both self-imposed and projected onto others, allowed him to carry out his sinister plan without arousing suspicion. It's a chilling reminder of how individuals can skillfully conceal their true intentions even in plain sight. The investigation that followed the murder of the Coleman family unveiled a web of evidence that pointed unequivocally to Chris's guilt. Forensic analysts, electronic communication and witness testimonies painted a damning portrait of a man consumed by his desires and willing to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. The evidence stacked up against Chris. Initially, because of Chris's professional relationship with controversial preacher Joyce Meyer, Chris began writing himself and Joyce death threats. These threats alluded to his relationship with Joyce and demanded that he stopped working with her immediately. Given Joyce's controversial position as the spiritual leader in the USA, the death threats were convincing. They went as follows. However, upon investigation after the murders, it was determined that the messages were sent from an email address created using Chris Coleman's IP address. He'd been sending the threats to himself. On the morning of the murders, May 5, 2009, Chris Coleman left his home at 5:45 a.m. Chris went to the gym. It was a gym he had not attended much over the last year. In fact, it seemed apparent that he only signed up to this specific gym to give himself an alibi. The drive was across the river in St. Louis. While at the gym, Chris called and texted Sherry. This is a woman that he'd been avoiding and snubbing over the last 6 months or so, and on that morning he was texting his wife and showing concern at her lack of response. At 6:56 a.m, Chris returned home. The police had already attended at this point, and Chris had called the police and a neighbour expressed concerns over Sherry. At this point, the police had seen the carnage left behind. Chris's 2 children and wife were strangled to death using a ligature in a slow and brutal act of murderous rage. Sherry and her 2 children were killed one by one. There were scrawlings on the walls in red paint. This was seemingly connected to the malicious emails sent previously. Chris had scratches on his arm. This was noticed at the scene, and when the police pointed this out to Chris at the time, he began hitting his arm against a gurney. The police took Chris in for questioning and spun him around in circles at his inconsistent stories. Chris's father, Pastor Ron Coleman, would later describe the interview as a lamb to the wolves. Before charges were brought, Chris's callous behaviour was apparent to neighbours and well-wishers. He threw away a memorial for the victims, cleared out all the belongings of his wife and kids, and tried to bury Sherry as soon as he could, without informing Sherry's own family of the arrangements, leaving them cast aside immediately. Police, however, had enough evidence to charge Chris. They had an MX card with proof of purchase of the red spray paint used on the wall. They had the destroychris@gmail.com address linked to Chris's own laptop, and the handwriting experts could link the handwriting at the scene to Chris, including the grammatical errors being consistent with Chris's syntax, and they had the motive of his affair with Tara Lynns. Tara was a witness in the case and did the right thing by dumping him after he was found guilty. After all, she could have been next. There was enough evidence for a jury of 12 to convict Chris for each individual murder and sentence him to life in prison. Despite this, the entire Coleman family believe Chris was framed and is completely innocent. To this day, there has been no admittance of guilt from Christopher Coleman. The case of Chris Coleman stands as a haunting testament to the depths of evil and denial that can lurk within seemingly ordinary individuals. To quote the brilliant Michael Cuneo, who wrote the thrilling book One Last Kiss about the Coleman murders, Sherry weighed all of 95 pounds when Chris battered her into submission and strangled her to death. Garrett and Gavin were skinny little kids. After murdering them all, Chris scored "fuck you" in red paint on 9-year-old Gavin's bedsheets. He likely would have scored something similarly lurid on 11-year-old Gareth's sheets had he not run out of paint. In the end, this is all we need to know about Chris Coleman. This tells the whole story. This tells us the type of man that Chris Coleman was.
I don't know.
Did you know, did you talk to anybody about arranging her death?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. You're
It's not enough. What do you mean when you say it's not enough? What do you mean?
I'm still fucking alive.